Can y'all hear me? Yes, yes, all right. Well, it's great to be here. I've been very impressed. First time to Switzerland, and it's amazing how clean this city is. First and foremost, I mean, and it's not laughable. I was following somebody yesterday who was just walking randomly along, and stopped in front of me. I almost ran into them, and he just paused and looked down for 3 seconds, pulled out a napkin out of his pocket, and reached over and picked up a cigarette butt, and walked it over to a trash can, which is. And I just stopped, and I thought it was amazing that. So obviously, I've loved all the people that I've met here. It's clear that you all care a lot about the environment and your country, and it's been really a kind of a breath of fresh air. Almost, I feel like I've left the dystopia of the United States and come here for a little bit. But it's been so I really appreciate you hosting us. Really appreciate the organizers, and have had a really good time so far. So in that void of space that I had yesterday, I basically rewrote my talk. So I had intended to come and talk about chatbots, how to build chatbots, what's like, what libraries you could use, some lessons learned, and those types of things. But I've kind of pivoted a little bit because I've gone through this evolution of thinking, and I thought maybe it'd be helpful to share kind of where I am and how I think about things, and what I think about even chatbots and even the application of machine learning and AI to some real use cases, and something I'm passionate about, which is really, how do we do work? How do teams do work? And what do those teams look like? And so, I'm Brevoort pretty much everywhere, but specifically on GitHub and Twitter. If you want to reach out to me and follow me there. DMs are open on Twitter, as they say, so please be kind. And so I'm from a company called Robots and Pencils, which is kind of a unique company. The whole foundation of the company we're about 8 years old, completely bootstrapped around this vision of building a long-standing 100-year-old plus company. And it was all sort of founded off this lecture in 1959 from C.P. Snow called Two Cultures, that postulated that the detriment of society was the separation of the arts and sciences, and that these two groups of people were sort of contentious and didn't understand each other, and if they did understand each other better, we'd solve a lot of the world's problems together. And so robots are engineers and pencils are artists, and so we have a very deep appreciation of sort of each other, and it really forces you to think through not just the technology used, but the application of that, and the sort of the design of it, and the feel of it, and the emotion and the empathy behind it as well. So I have a lot of passion for user interfaces and overall usability of products in general. And so just give you a little bit of a background on sort of the evolution I've made over the last couple of years. So about 2 years ago, we launched a new product. It was called Beep Boop. It was a bot hosting platform. It was right around the time that bots were kind of becoming a thing, that the whole hype cycle was really starting up. It was still pre-Slack platform bot launch, pre-Messenger launch, but Kik had just launched a bot hosting platform, and we thought that containers and bots were a really interesting fit. It was a lot harder to host bots then, and so we set off and we built a developer platform to be able to run and scale chatbots. And so, but through that evolution over the last couple of years, and I'll talk a little bit about that, we've recently pivoted that and have launched in September a new product called Missions, which is a workflow system for Slack that's targeted more so at business users and less at developers. We found our biggest constraint was that even with the organizations that we worked with to create these messaging interfaces, these bots, still needing a developer was a considerable limitation for them. And so, actually, I want to just start with a story. And so, this is a scene in Wall Street, in front of the New York Stock Exchange or the Gold Room in 1860. And in 1860, you can see there's still horse and carriages. The telegraph was yet to be invented, but it soon would be at the end of the decade. And so there were, at the Stock Exchange in the Gold Room, is where the price for gold and commodities would be established. And so what happened would be, initially it was inside the building, and then there are no pictures. I tried to find photographs of these things that are described. There's actually a great book called The Victorian Internet, which is a really interesting read that talks about the sort of evolution of communication and how we got to the internet. But the way they would communicate the price of gold was they began to write on the outside, like a chalkboard, and they put the numbers up on the outside. And all of these trading houses had offices as close as they could to Wall Street, but some of them were 2-3 blocks away. And so some of these trading houses would employ up to 12 boys, like school-age kids that would stand outside of here, and they just watch for price changes, or watch for when the price doesn't change, and they would just run back and forth. So you'd have 12 people running back and forth to each office, just communicating when the price of gold changed. And it was really about shared understanding, really. It was really important for them to know when the price changed, right? Because it helped them manage, whether they were going to buy or sell or what they were going to do. But it was really interesting that that's how sort of humans were used in this. And if you think about why they need that information and why it's so important to us, that a lot of this is just a sort of up-to-date shared understanding. And so if we sort of roll that all back and think about how we do work, like how do we actually progress and understand each other and move things forward and accomplish some goal, usually the best model for this is face-to-face communication in person, right? And sort of every bit of technology that's been applied to that since then has been this attempt to try to make what we do in a remote fashion more like this. But even in cases like this, I'm sure they wish they had a whiteboard, in these discussions to say, let me draw a picture for you. And so since then came letter writing, which was an amazing advancement, right? Lets you actually do work sort of asynchronously in remote places. People even played things like chess remotely over the course of months and months, but let us share information. And then came along the telegraph, which was almost instantaneous communication. We would think that it's a bottleneck and actually slow at this point, but it was the first ability to remotely to be able to communicate and to get on the same page. And then as we advance further, we'll see the telephone was a huge advancement in that, as well as the first one of the first video teleconference, which again started to not just take verbal communication, but be able to communicate some of the the visual cues that get left out. And I think that's even what we find in text-based communication, that it's not a very good approximation of real face-to-face communication, because there's visual cues, there's attenuation in your voice and tone, and lots of things that are lost in translation of text. And so the biggest advancement outside of maybe electricity or the light bulb is email, right? Which is, which I say that with lots of sarcasm. But email really did transform how we worked with each other, how we worked with people outside of our company. It was, the internet and the web was really about how you searched for and found information, and email was about how you actually communicated with people. And it really did transform how we worked, even today. I think I saw Paige this morning, and she told me about how many emails she woke up to, right? And it's still kind of the reality today. And a lot of us, this work is email. People, they just slave away trying to, work away at their inbox, and you talk to people in like recovery rooms, and they're like, oh, I just declared bankruptcy, and I archived everything, and I'm starting fresh again. I'm getting back on the wagon. And so there was email, and then there was also different chat interfaces. So does everybody know what this is? Anybody use this? Some people still use this today. This is IRC. This is a really old protocol, about as old as email, which stands for Internet Relay Communication, and it's similar to what some of the communication tools look today, but then we have other chat platforms, real-time chat platforms, that again are connecting people and sharing information in real time. And then we started to see things like document sharing that really enabled remote collaboration of people, in this case, a tool like SharePoint, the beloved SharePoint, which allowed us to share. That was the point. That still lives on today, and then I know the first time I saw Google Docs, I was blown away. Or even some of the more real-time collaborative applications like Trello that actually let two groups of people, and it wasn't so. A lot of times, we were doing this to support remote people. So you were on the phone, you were using Google Docs, you could edit at the same time. Maybe you were even speaking to each other, but you were editing at the same time, and you could follow people's cursors. what I found a lot of times, even in face-to-face meetings, we started to use real-time tools. So like the 10 people around the table could be edited in the same doc. Or the 10 people around the table could be dragging cards around in Trello and actually enhance the face-to-face communication. And so I think all these things are really interesting and really progressing to like a really interesting place where technology really is making work better. The one problem I have with a lot of it is that it just isn't very extensible. You could say, well, what do you mean the phone's not very extensible? And maybe not so much the phone, but things like Google Docs and some of those tools that we use. And I find that a lot of times we're forced into these ways of working that are dictated by the tools that we use. And it seems wrong. It seems like the tools should adjust to us, or we should be able to craft the tools to be able to work better. And I think the reason I think this is important, and this is something that I've seen a lot be true over the course of the last couple years at least, as we looked at tools, is that every company really is different. And I know we like to treat them the same, and because really every team in every company is different, every division of every company. Like if you were to go and talk to someone like IBM and say, tell me how IBM does collaboration, there's no answer to that. The CIO might tell you something. It's like, well, we use collaboration, we use Box, and we use Mural, and we use Slack, and we use this and that. But the reality is that the way work actually gets done in teams is very different and very diverse. And whether that's at a division or a team level or a company level, even down to the individual person, both how they prefer to work and how they work is very unique. And a lot of the tools that are at the surface that we see people using are the ones that enterprises adopt, including our CRM systems and our ERP systems and some of these custom systems we built. Lots of what we found is the majority of work doesn't actually get done in those tools. It gets done in things like Excel or spreadsheets or Trello. I mean, I've been in companies where people would revolt and sign up for all sorts of shadow services, right? Cloud services. But people do what they can to get the job sort of done. And I think there's been this big movement to force us into working in certain ways because of the tools that we adopt, and it just keeps getting worse the more and more tools that we have that then don't work together. And so this I tend to dwell on over and over and over again in my mind when I think through things, and I think it's really true. So Elon Musk, you're all familiar with Elon Musk, I assume. He said that the real problem that they're trying to solve, and I think this was really in reference to Tesla, was that the true difficulty of what they're trying to do is, and he felt like really the greatest potential that they had was in building the machine that makes the machine. And that thing was actually the most important thing. Like the factory was the innovation, and the factory was the real product. And what really differentiates Tesla and what they do is the factory. I think this is really true in a lot of ways of many teams, and we don't realize it. And it's becoming, I think, more important, and people are really starting to see it, that really how we differentiate going forward isn't going to be the tools that we buy or the giant systems that we use and leverage. The way that we're going to differentiate in the marketplace and survive and innovate is by embracing talent and embracing people and enabling them and unlocking them. And it's one of those things that are really passionate of. How do you sort of unlock the talent in your organization? And so I would argue that the tools that we use, the teams that we're on, the people that we work with, how we feel about how we work, is the product. Like it's the machine that we are the machine that makes the machine. And so, there's been a lot of talk about the rate at which technology is changing. I know I've certainly seen in my career as a developer that the pace has gotten faster and faster, and you just feel like you're on this rat wheel trying to keep up. And you go and you work on a project for a little while, and you get really deep into something, and then you pop up and pick your head up, and you're like, oh shit, like containers and TensorFlow and Kubernetes, and you have to figure out like which way to go, and you're trying to like navigate this video game forest, and you don't want to find yourself into a dead end. That's what it feels like. And then you're in a dead end, you run back, and you try to catch up this way, and that's what it feels like. And that's what business feels like. That's what, you try to manage all these priorities at work and things. And so people argue to say that the pace of technology is changing at a rate to which humans cannot keep up anymore. And so we need to find strategies to be able to adapt, learn faster, and sort of govern and work smarter. And I think this is the place where AI and machine learning and really leveraging sort of systems of data can really help, I think, bridge this gap. And so how, right? So if we're going to, let's say, use AI techniques, use machine learning to help us actually work better, work smarter, and more effectively, how do we actually do that? And it's a lot harder than we think. You know, I've done a lot of, you know, presentations and things with demos where we show a lot of fancy, flashy demos, but actually turn out they're not very applicable to real-world things. And that's kind of bothered me, and I feel like I'm recovering from that, right? Say, hey, look, I will take out my phone later and do a demo. But take out my phone and real time through Twilio a message, and look, this pops up here and shows up there and on a map, and you're like, wow, it's really amazing. But what do I actually do with that, right? I think it looks flashy, but how do I actually apply that? And so what I've found in my life at work, when I actually try to go and solve problems, especially at the team, inside like my team, the big problem with a lot of things is just where does it plug in, right? And I know early on in my career, and definitely getting older, I pulled out a gray hair today. The Microsoft Cognitive Services said that I was still in my late 30s, so I'm appreciated for that. But we used to, early on, there was always this build versus buy debate. Build versus buy. And the buy, you know, people called like, you know, consumer off the shelf, right? So it was COTS. I did some government work back then, so it certainly was. They called it COTS. But when you built something, you kind of knew what that was at that time. So around, let's say the year 2000, you knew what it was to build something. And it probably wasn't, it might have been either a desktop app or it was a web app on your intranet that had to just work in IE6. That was kind of what it had to do. And you could put it under your desk, it was on the network, people could get to it, and you had this tool that you could build. And that was really liberating and interesting. But things have gotten a lot more complicated over the last 15 or so years. And so let's say we have data that we're beginning to collect, or even we're wondering, how do we even start to score data that we have, or how do we start to work in AI into how we actually do work, build things, and make decisions. And so if you say, well, I don't know, literally where would that plug in? Would you send notifications via email? And then what do you do with that then? Is it another application someone has to go to log into? And when they do, how do they sign in and what do they do? Does it fit on one of these platforms? I mean, maybe you use SAP, maybe you use Salesforce, and you buy into, let's say, Salesforce's Einstein platform, and you just assume that these vendors are going to build AI for you, and you're going to be able to sort of leverage intelligence around your data in that platform, but then it's just in your platform, you have data that's all over the place. And so I think if we embrace the fact that we're all so different in terms of how we work, the partners that we work with, the tools that we use, we really have to start to take some of these things on ourselves. And I think, the biggest challenge I've found is if you're going to say, let's build it, it usually comes in the form of some application, you start to ask these questions, like, if I build it today, is it mobile? And if it's mobile, is it native? And if it's native, is it iOS or Android? Like, do we have some standard, or do we have a bring your own device program? And so do we need to build one app or two apps? And by the way, I'm one person, or I'm this small team that wants to build this internal tool that I don't have endorsement for, or that I'm not going to spend the 12 to 18 months to go through the budget process to get a team formed, because by the way, the tools and problems change. And so a lot of the times we don't build things internally anymore is because when we stop to build them, everything else shifts and changes anyway. So it's a lot easier to find something in the marketplace to buy. But the problem is the products that we want actually don't exist in the marketplace because our problems are unique. And so we continue to ask these questions like, is it a web app? Is it responsive? Is it real time? Like, we have people expecting consumer grade features and quality out of these tools and the systems they use at work. And you just, do I need to receive push notifications? Like, how do I notify someone asynchronously when they're away from their computer? And there's always problems to solve when you go and build some product that you have to build. When you're building a custom app, you have to answer all these questions. Like, how do I authenticate? What do I do for security? What do I do for authorization? Is there some directory? Like, back in the day, you would just build your IE6 web app and connect some like Active Directory, and you would just do single sign-on through your tools. And that was really important back then. And now there's things like, even you would say, well, it's behind the firewall. What the hell is a firewall today? It doesn't really exist, right? There's such a deep web of infrastructure that's really complicated. And so even when you build this in companies, one of the biggest things, even if you could build it, a lot of problems people have is, where do I run it? Because the team that runs things you throw over to the wall just throws it back or says like, no, we're too busy, and it happens all the time. And so there's a lot of like data leakage problems at companies. There's a lot of places where the CIO doesn't want to know, but developers in their company are using open source tools and using open source services, or using like SaaS-based services. Some even just paying for them out of their own pocket. Like I've done that myself. Even when we adopted HipChat, when I was at Pearson at the time, I adopted HipChat because I was so tired of the tools that we were using and started to put it on my credit card. And soon my team was using it, and then the team we worked with was using it. And then eventually it grew to the point where it was $2,500 a month. And my manager at the time was just like go, 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 go. That was his mentality, like just go do what you're doing. We did the same thing with, I was expensing AWS on my credit card to the tunes of thousands of dollars, and he was expensing and improving it. But I was really worried that he would leave or something would happen. And eventually that got taken over, but like people are doing this every day. So, the other problem is just who owns this stuff. And so I've kind of belabored the point of I think there's a lot of value in doing building custom, but we don't do it today because it's very hard, it's very expensive, and there's a lot of questions to answer that you don't really have time even to answer. And one of the trends that I found really interesting when I talk about work tools and how we work is this new class of product that isn't that different than what we had before, and are evolving, and isn't the end state. They're continuing to evolve, but that I'll call team messaging. And so HipChat actually was, I think, one of the early iterations of that, and so was Campfire, if you're familiar with that. HipChat, if you don't know, is being replaced by Stride, by Atlassian. Slack is probably one of it's been around the longest out of these, and probably used the most so far. Workplace by Facebook has recently launched. So who's familiar with these products? Anybody? Who uses Slack? Maybe Slack. Do you Slack at work? Yeah, so some people, not many, right? Yeah, interesting. How about Microsoft Teams? Anybody? Interesting. I laugh. I mean, Teams is a really interesting strategy, right, for Microsoft, because one, the team that built Teams is Microsoft Research that sort of incubated that. It's a central part of their strategy. And the selling point's really easy, right? So you're an Office 365 subscriber. Here you go. It's free. Let me show you how you could use that. So Teams is really interesting, and I think I've been really impressed with sort of the cultural transformation of Microsoft under Satya. How about Workplace or Facebook? A couple? That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't spent much time with that. And then Stride, I think, is in limited release. Anybody use HipChat? All right, so yeah, quite a few. And for you that use HipChat, how important is it that you run it on your own infrastructure? Is that probably that's right. So that's still like the key differentiator. I'm really curious to see if they do that with Stride or not. Most of these other products don't do that, right? Okay, so I'll talk about Slack because I'm most familiar with Slack, and I think they're the furthest along. I think in the context of everything else I said, I think what's really interesting about the category of product that Slack is that you have this tool, and that is on your phone, it's on your desktop, it's basically across any device that you interact with from a productivity standpoint, it's probably there. And if it's not, if you have a web browser, you can get it on the web browser. And so it's sort of anybody in your team or partners that you work with connected sort of anytime. And then in addition to that, it brings in data and notifications, intelligence from other systems, and under these very specific contexts. So and those contexts are in the form of channels, which are really similar to what we saw in IRC. And those channels could be organized around offices or departments or projects, or really however you see fit. And we've seen this done in many different ways across different organizations where they really make it their own. And they call those channels their own names. Like, it's important that you can name them with the semantics of your organization. And I think what's most interesting to me about this is it's like almost the first time where we've had all these people connected, at least if you look at these tools and people use them the way that we've used them, or we've seen companies that are really pushing forward on getting people on these tools and using them to sort of their biggest potential. You almost have this people operating system. Like, you have all these people that are connected on this tool now that are actually they're operating at the same level as some of the systems that you have. And I think what's most interesting outside of this to me is that they're platforms. So they come with very rich APIs that allow you to build on top of them and customize them for your will, and including other third-party integrations. So like Slack has a directory where you could go, and if you use Jira, if you use ServiceNow or integration, or if you use any of the thousands or so integrations that's supported in that directory, you could very easily adopt those. But it's also very easy to create your own, where I think this gets really interesting. And so if you're not familiar with Slack, it looks actually a lot like that IRC channel. Slack's organized in the form of teams, so it's like a team messaging chat tool. You have channels, so channels are just groupings of messages with members, right? So you might have a team channel of the project team that you're working on that's named after that team. It may be public or private, so visible within this context or not. And then you have one-on-one direct messages, and then you have apps. And they've renamed this apps from bots. It used to be called bots. Now Slack's starting to refer to these things as apps, because bots are now looking a lot more like apps inside of the platform. And then you have the main messaging area. And so when you think about that, and a lot of times you talk to people about Slack and those tools, they just go, what's the big deal? It's basically persistent team chat. It's like Skype or Messenger, the old like Messenger, AOL, kind of on steroids, organized with channels in a shared context. And it is, but what I think is really interesting is the platform capabilities that let you build on top of these tools. And just to kind of show you an example of that, this is so in our office, and I'm from Denver, Colorado, and so in our office we have a Mac Mini that has a Spotify client on it that's attached to a Bluetooth speaker. And so that's how we choose what music is played in the office. So everybody's on Slack, and the way we do this is we actually built and this is kind of in a day we built this, which is just a Spotify client in our music. So it's a private channel. It's only it was public before, but you had people from our company that aren't in our office come along and like Rick rolled us over and over and over again and played Boyz II Men or whatever. And so, but it's really interesting. Like you have this shared context, and I've demoed this a couple times from remote places, and be like, it's this weird feeling of liberation where I can actually change the music playing in my office from Switzerland, right, with sub-second latency. And you get this across every device, right? And you have these simple building block primitives you could build on top of. And this is not the greatest of business for work use cases. It solved one of our team's problems and makes kind of life a little bit better. But it's not just messages. So now you have some of these interactive components like buttons and menus, and you could be updating these messages. So this message actually, it just keeps going to the bottom as things go on top. So you end up having this little mini app inside of this channel to be able to control the music. And again, you could do that on mobile or desktop. And so just some of the sort of basic building block primitives. When you hear about bots, a bot is basically it's a user. So it's really the same as any other user in a tool like Slack, except that it's backed by an API or a machine that is either intelligent or, in many cases, very dumb. And so Slack also has this thing called slash commands, which were a carryover from IRC, which most business users find completely unusable and unintuitive, right? So it's this whole idea of you press it. It feels very command line-like, and usually has syntax in the commands. But just so we kind of understand some of the building blocks. So let's talk about bots, right? It's a long time getting here. It's originally what this talk was about. And one of the things that I think bots came with a lot of hype. And a lot of people making assumptions about, like, oh, now that we have bots, and now that we're making advances in natural language understanding, which is usually when people talk about bots, that's the sort of the portion of AI that they talk about, which is our ability to understand language. They quickly made this leap to, oh, now we have intelligent machines that can talk to us in natural language. And what's better, why wouldn't you want to talk to a machine in natural language and text? Like, that's just, it's the most natural thing ever. But I think as like an experiment, if you look here, and as you stare at this blinking cursor, is this the most intuitive interface ever? Right? Is this the one that you're like, finally, we finally did it. Now we have this place I can just type to the computer, and it understands me and does anything that I tell it. And as it turns out, especially as a user interface, it's It's very unapproachable. You have no idea what some of these things do. You have to start typing, and usually they're not very smart about telling what they could do. And for a lot of reasons, it's because the technology just really isn't there to properly understand all the nuances in language and context. And so a lot of the people that rode sort of the bot hype and started to build very textual interfaces, what we found is those kind of fell flat on their face. And so this is kind of an example. This is like one of these old slides I used to share around, and this is just the idea of if you're going to build a chatbot, either be very, very smart or be very, very dumb, and not in between. Like, you don't want to get caught in between. And so this is like the experience of a lot of these chatbots where you're like, hi there. You come in, you see this bot, and you're like, ooh, it's a bot. Look at him. He's got a cartoon. And you say, and he responds, hello, Mike. How are you? And you're like, oh, we're in the future now. You know, he knows who I am. He's asking me. He cares how I am, right? And as people, you start to kind of humanize these things, and you go, pretty good. How are you? You know. And is just peachy, thanks for asking. And you're like, oh, he appreciates that I'm even asking this, right? And you're like, how's the weather there? And it's like, oh, the weather in the computer is very wonderful, you know. It's hot and balmy, and the hum of the fan doesn't get any better than this. And you're like, wow, what an amazing experience. And then you just go off the rails, right? And then you're like, what else can I ask? You're like, oh, that's weird, sweet. And he goes, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Need help? Just ask for help. And you're like, wait a minute, we were just having this, like, we were just getting to the next level, having this very deep conversation. Like, and you go, what? I don't understand. Like, what just happened here? And it's like, I don't understand that either. I need help. And then pretty soon it just falls apart, and your delight is turned into just pure disgust and disenchantment, to the point that, like, we use intercom on missions on the product, and I swear, and we have some of these prompts that prompt users to say, like, once they get past certain milestones, to say, like, hey, we're really interested in why you came and what you're trying to accomplish. Like, what workflows are you trying to design and build? Half of the people go, oh, God, please tell me you're not a bot. I swear to God, half of them say that, right? So I think people are already disenchanted with bots. And so one of my hang-ups to talking about, like, bots, at least bots in the form of, like, text bots or, like, chat bots, is that after, let's say, a couple of years of this, tell me the one that's indispensable to you. Tell me the one that, you know, that your mom came to you and said, oh, I found this chatbot on Facebook Messenger. It's amazing. It's like my new best friend. Have you seen the movie Her? Like, it's just like that, you know, or it really helps me. Like, they haven't really materialized. I think in practice, there's a lot of opportunity there. I think we're still really far off from a technology perspective. And these things demo really well because they demo. That first screen you saw is how they demo. But the reality is the second screen, right? I've been to some demos, you'd be like, oh, I've got a travel button. Look, I'm going to start the conversation by using the plane emoji. I'm like, who wants to do that? Whoever does that? It looks great in the demo, but it's not really practical. When you know, as it turns out, booking travel is a lot easier in a rich user interface that gives me all the sort of details and data to be able to make a decision about when my flights are, when they take off, when do they arrive, could you imagine picking a seat through a chatbot? Like, how would you even do that? You end up with this, like, ASCII map of your plane, and then you'd have to describe in text, like, 4 from the right, 2 down, right? It just doesn't work. And so what you've seen is, if you see these chatbot platforms, the platforms themselves are really moving to adopt more richer controls. So carousels, buttons, suggestive response, they're becoming much more of a sort of interactive in-messaging experience and much less text-oriented. And so the other reason a lot of these things fail is if you just sort of consider today, like, what's the state of the art? All right, so Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, Cortana, these things, outside of some stealth startups who are basically on a 3 to 5 year plan to build sort of the next gen of technology capability. Think about the state of the art. Think about how angry you get at Siri when he or she doesn't understand you, or even Alexa, where, you know, my kids are like, it's dumb, you know, like, and here you are, and you're like, I'm going to build a chatbot in a weekend, you know, and it's going to be amazing and intelligent, and so, like, this is kind of what you're up against. And so, like, if the state of the art is very frustrating and not there, odds are that your small startup trying to do this in 2 months, or your weekend project probably isn't going to be any smarter than these either. Because talking to computers is hard and unintuitive, right? I just noticed that his badge says like quit smoking. That's kind of funny. And so I think like these are not the bots you're looking for, right? It's kind of different than we thought it was going to be. Thanks. And so I like to look at these apps, but I don't think it invalidates it. I think it almost fine-tunes the value of some of these things, because I think the value isn't the chatbot. It was almost a red herring. It was these platforms that they could be part of, and that they're messaging apps or integrations or features or experiences. I don't really know what to call these, but I think, especially for the work use cases, these are really about workflows. It's about how work gets done with these people that are connected, and I think that's the way I've been thinking about this, and I think it seems more on par with what you're trying to accomplish and how you design these things, versus starting off creating a chatbot that has to answer all of the sort of niceties, and where you quickly run out of those things. You can really focus on like, okay, I have this messaging interface. How do I bring work into that and bring information and data and help people do their jobs? And so let's say you're going to build on top of the Slack platform, right? Which is kind of interesting to say like, hey, I've got this platform where my whole team's connected if I'm allowed to use it. And whether that could be Workplace, it could be Microsoft Teams, any one of these platforms that comes with kind of a rich API layer, and there's even us. So Missions is trying to enable people to build workflows on top of Slack, like the type of user that if you can use Excel or use Trello, you can design and build workflows. But as a developer, it's actually really simple too, and I'll show you some examples of that. So one of the most common use cases is just notifications. And if you think about even a simple notification, where would you deliver these otherwise, right? Probably email is the only place. That's why your email is the way it is, right? It's full of garbage. It's like all these things that you care and don't care about, and it's filtered out as spam, or you're configuring all these rules about priority and where they go. The interesting part about these team messaging platforms is that all these notifications don't have to go to you individually or fan out individually. They could go to very specific contexts for very specific purposes, and they're also fairly easy to turn off. And so if you're going to, one way is, so if you say I have this system, and I want to notify a team, what happens? I could use a notification. And so as you start to build these notifications, you say, well, if I'm going to notify, I should probably add a little bit more context around the notification to say, like, in this case, say maybe it's important, let's even for the team to celebrate, hey, we have a new customer. It's Amy Smith of the International Business Corp. So, yay. And so we give visibility even to our team. Maybe it's even our engineering team, or all the team rallied around a certain product to be able to give them, let them know. And for example, we can start to celebrate when things happen. It's kind of interesting. The more you make those types of things transparent, and so it's not just the marketing team or not just the growth team responsible, the more you can make these things visible to the team that's responsible for actually building the thing, the more I think you have the opportunity to change your culture. And so let me just show you really quickly what that actually looks like from like a programming perspective. It's actually really simple. So I don't know if anybody's seen Glitch. This is Glitch, which is from Fog Creek. It's kind of this awesome web-based editing, hosting, quasi-product from the same team or company that Stack Overflow came from. But so this is actually, I can share this and it's public, some of these examples. But so to send a simple notification is actually really simple. All you do is call the post message function or endpoint to Slack, pass it your token, a channel, so where you want to send it, and the text. And so in this case, I have I can go here, and I just have this endpoint here where I kind of can hit it and send it some text that I pull off of a query parameter. And so I have this as a new release is ready to leave the station and just needs the OK, right? So I can go ahead and send that. And so if I go over to Slack and, oops, sorry, this is an interesting opportunity to show you how our team uses Slack, right? So we're very serious about celebrating people's birthdays, and I know it's Chris's birthday, and he's awesome, and so we have this Yay channel, but there's lots of like channels that pop up like this, but I think that these are the types of tools that can really change your culture and how people connect to each other at work. And so here's this channel I sent that to, and it's just from the release train that says, hey, a new release is ready to leave the station. So super easy. A lot of times I think I've done things like this before. It's been like, hey, can we have Jenkins that runs our builds, and maybe we can have a Jenkins job that gets scheduled to do this thing that's just like totally inappropriate to do, but you have nowhere else to do it, and you end up using it for that. And so it's really interesting that you could, it's really easy to actually send these notifications. So simple. But then a lot of times, especially if you look at a lot of the integrations people have already built in these platforms, is they don't really, it's like the then what? Like, well, I got this notification, so there's a problem or a new customer, but then what? You have this kind of rich, interactive environment. Either like, can I get more information? Can I do something about it? And so in this case, maybe you want the ability just to see more details about it. You click the button and replace and update the message. So you can bring a little bit more context. You can control how much noise you're spamming into the channel and so on. But I think what's really there's a huge opportunity to sort of make these notifications actionable to the point that you don't have to leave the tool. So I get a notification that says there's a problem, and even if it's like, I'm sure a lot of people have been IT girl or guy here, and they get the problem, and they're like, if I just could have the button, if I could get notified on the button and be like, restart the server or whatever, restart the whatever it is, like just press the button. I know I don't have time to fix the root cause of the problem, but it would really make my life easier. So that I'm not trying to like on my phone, and I've done this, like I've used an SSH client into a server from my phone under the table at dinner, trying to, which gets a lot harder in the cloud, where things are much more ephemeral. But it's interesting if you try to apply this, though, to business problems, to say, like, when things happen, in this case, right, this is just a simple sort of PTO type workflow, right? And we have the same problem of, like, the SSH into a server thing, right? Like, I get a notification, even let's say it's an email that says, hey, Amy Smith wants, time off in November. Let me go approve that. And, like, so now I have to go to this HRIS system that I never go to. I try to avoid at all costs. It doesn't work on the browser really that I want to work on. It makes me feel awful about myself and the work that I do in the company that I'm at because I'm using this very arcane, awful system. I'm probably exaggerating there a little bit. But you have to log into it. You have to remember your credentials. It's all this, it's like, how can you just provide this type of thing in context? And so I think making notifications actionable is like a huge opportunity. There's like tons of small wins there. And that's pretty simple as well. So I'll just show you another sort of code snippet for how to do that. And so this is, again, the same. Like, I'll just hit this endpoint that sends in, like, an approval notification. And this is just using this chainable JavaScript API, this library, to create the Slack message JSON body, where we're going to have a message with an attachment. So that's like, you can have these attachments in the Slack message. And they're going to have an approve or deny button. And it's going to send the value of approve and deny. And I'm just going to post that into that channel then. And so the way that you deal with these things is the button handlers is there's just you receive another request. So you register an endpoint, in this case with Slack, and you receive. So I receive this callback URL for approval, and I can deal with that. In this case, I'm basically taking the original message and I'm replacing the button click with the value that you clicked. But this is the stub out to like call out and make the API call for that thing that you want to do. But again, it's pretty straightforward to do these things. To start, you have these building blocks that are really easy. Where it really reminds me of when you started building when mobile development sort of came to the fold, and there was only one iPhone, and it was of one resolution. It's like the way it looked. It was the breath of fresh air coming from the dark days of web development and browser wars and differences and inconsistencies and IE6 and everything. Where you put the button was where it was, and what it did. When you did it, it did every time, and you have to deal with those issues. And I think Slack and these platforms are interesting to be able to create user interfaces on top of them. You get the same kind of productivity out of them. And so if we go and look at that now, I sent in this message, it now has approve or deny, and I could say, I don't like Amy very much, and I want her to work more, and so I'm going to say deny. Or wait, this is a different example. This is a sort of the new release is ready. And what this basically could be is this button click could then call the API to then orchestrate, an entire deployment. Right? The interface doesn't have to be complex. You could hide a lot of complexity. And so, move on here. So inside of Slack, there's also a new forms capability, which is really interesting. So you're starting to see like these interactive elements that are these building blocks to create kind of valuable experiences inside of them. And so I think that this sentiment is really true from Vala is I think the chief digital evangelist at Salesforce, but I like this tweet here, which was really that people are really worried about AI replacing their jobs and people. I think that much more likely to people are much more likely to be replaced by people that use AI, and sort of where you can think about like how can I augment human intelligence? How can I sort of give people superpowers in ways that they didn't have before to make them more effective, better at their job, to remove the parts of their job that they don't like, to just make them more knowledgeable, more actionable. And so I think, though, when we envision, like, how is AI, or what does the future interface look like? We tend to, like, envision things like this. You know, Tony Stark using his hands, and you see demos like this with, like, Leap Motion and some of the AR demos, and you feel bad for the person that actually has to build this user interface, right? Like, you think about how hard it is to create user interfaces and things that are usable, and until computers can do that for us, and I guess we'll all be out of a job, it's not going to work that way, right? Things don't look like that. It's going to be a long time before things look like this. And if they look like this, it's just because this is the thing that you do in your, like, executive briefing center for your customers to come look at you like, we're innovative. You know, we're on our company's name, you know, InnoVenture, because innovation isn't an adventure, and, like, look what we could do, that kind of thing. So, and so I think, you know, these interfaces really don't have to look like this. They could be simpler, and they should be simpler. And I think the more that we can hide the complexity from the average person, the better. And so and I'm, you know, talking here, I'm not a data scientist. I've had I don't pretend to be one either. I've had the privilege of working with some amazing people. But one of the things that always came up was just, well, how do we... It's one thing to score data in mass, and that's a whole other problem, and look at building feedback systems into your products. But there's some things that it'd kind of be interesting to use a platform like Slack. Let's say your whole team's on it, and you wanted to sort of gamify the scoring or classification of some of your data. Like, for example, in this case, what if you could reach out to people or say, I don't know if you remember, you probably don't remember, but in the last election cycle, the presidential election, or actually it was the one before that, it was the one where Obama ran, they did this amazing Twilio integration that allowed anybody to come sign up and be one of the people that called sort of the list of phone numbers and tried to convince you to vote one way or another. And they sort of created this system that instead of having to have people come into these rooms where they have all the phones and you're calling, going through, it was like, hey, do you have 10 minutes? You just come to the website, you put your phone number in, and it calls you, and you answer, and then it connects you to some random voter, and you try to convince them to vote one way or another. It was really interesting. And so you could basically, like, classification Turk at your company to try to leverage the people at your company to even, for some of these things, we're like, hey, the data science team, I think, could gamify the company to say, hey, let's say it's going to be it's really important to us to be able to respond to urgent customer support requests, especially when like data and security could be a big risk, where someone calls in to say, hey, my account was hacked, I'm having this problem, I need help now, right away. And so maybe Slack is a good place to notify people of that. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's Slack. Maybe you're blasting everywhere. But this is an example where you say, hey, if you volunteer and you can send a message and say, hey, look over this, read it, and tell me, is it low, normal, high priority? And then when they do that, you could say, hey, you want to help with another? And they could say yes, and you could sort of go through that. And maybe you gamify it, and you say, well, I guess, anybody get an iPhone X? Or I think I went today, and I think it was 9 o'clock. But maybe that, it's like when they say, hey, the person that over the course of a month does this the most, you go into a raffle or something, and you can get some prize or something gamified in your company. And so I think when we talk about notifications, a lot of times those things get really noisy. And there's a real opportunity to use machine learning to actually filter out a lot of that noise. In this case, what if we use all that training data that we had to start to only notify the team on urgent customer support requests and not sort of the average things that get pent up in a queue? And then so if you're doing that, and let's say you're going direct to the team. So let's say these are going all the way to like tier 3 or something, support. It doesn't go through the normal life cycle of a ticket inside of an IT organization. And this goes to that team, and you even you make it actionable in the way that you give them the ability to say, I'll do it. So like this urgent matter comes in for the team, and it's also a way for them to communicate how we're going to prioritize how this work is getting done. Because what we don't want to do is 3 people to see this and 3 people to go off and start working on it and not know who's doing it. So click the button, you can see who actually claimed the notification. And so I think you can do that for other things too. So this is one I pulled together last night where I started to pull out, I started to use the Azure Cognitive Services around which is actually fairly easy to use, but it gives you the kind of regions of where faces were discovered. And so I trained it on a set of avatars for my team. at least one of the demo teams I've had. But in this case, uploaded photos. It carved out regions of the faces that it found in those images. And then this is an opportunity. They say, well, let's crop that image, take that. Who's the team member? So this is like a person selection where I could pick the team member and then actually score that and say, this is the person. And then I could train that person with this additional face, make it more accurate. So, and so I built this last night as well, which was at least a variant of this. And I'll show you that in a second. That's the last thing. Which is, it's interesting to say, well, how do I actually use AI practically in my company? This is one way around like photos that are used that either maybe need to be approved to go out publicly, maybe they have PII, maybe there's something sensitive in them. In this case, it'd be really interesting to know if somebody's sharing a photo of you somewhere in your team in Slack, because this makes things get really big and you're not part of these channels, like notify me. So in this case, say, hey, Mike, I'm 78% sure that you're in this photo that Julia just shared. And it gives you a link to the photo and the original message. And maybe there'd even be an approval flow or a takedown request button to say, like, that's a horrible photo of me. Like, take that down. Get rid of it. And so, sort of as the last thing here, I do have, I'll do it on my phone. And so this actually uses the Azure APIs, which is something we really didn't mention, which was that your team may not have data scientists, you may not have the time, you may not have the money, but it's really interesting, I think, is sort of the democratization of some of these capabilities. And they're limited in terms of what they can do, but I think we'll start to see more domain-specific APIs for some of these capabilities for models that are pre-trained and already solved, or give you some core building blocks to sort of be able to train against your own corpus on top of these models. But so in this, I'll go ahead and take a picture of myself, and hopefully I'll detect that I'm actually in the picture. So I'll do the same thing. Hopefully this my bionic microphone won't affect things. But I'm just going to upload this to this random channel. Wi-Fi willing. So there you see it. And this will actually run through a workflow that runs on that missions product that we have. And if it recognizes who I am, so it did, and then it's set up to basically send a message into this channel that says, hey, a new photo was uploaded, so here's the photo, and it was by Mike, and it includes, there's a 49% chance that it was actually me. And so, but this is something that I built last night, right? So last night, as I'm sitting in my hotel room, rewriting my talk, at the end of all that, I decided to do this. And so the one last thing is just to kind of show you what the code for that looks like. It's actually pretty straightforward. It's scrolling through, it's just kind of a series of calls through the Cognitive Services API to be able to, upload the photo and to detect the areas of faces, and then to call a sort of identify API to be able to identify does that match against any of the current people that have already been trained against. And if it does, we return that and output it. And sort of the port what that looks like in missions, which is this product that I'm not selling you, and remember to go to shop.comma.ai and get your hoodie, is kind of this. We look for a file shared in Slack. We then have this custom code step that you can call. It's just a webhook. So I call, it's running on Glitch that passes in the file and it returns a mention string, and then just sends this notification to the channel if that actually matches or doesn't abort. So it's and so the point of all this is these things aren't that hard. And even a lot of times the demos aren't that hard, but in practice they're hard. Like this I actually built on top of the production sort of mission services that we run, as well as the production cognitive services that you run. And I think we're at this really interesting time where we keep standing on the shoulders of giants, and now have the ability to do some really interesting, innovative things without a lot of effort if we just sort of try and find the right problems to do. And I think that's the opportunity for AI that I see in the most practical sense in organizations. It's finding problems, trying to solve them, but trying to keep all of the complexity under the surface. Right? You don't want to expose people to complexity. You don't want to spam them with all these notifications they shouldn't see. You don't want to show them the noise. You just want to show them, these sort of anticipatory user interfaces that can anticipate their need and show them things at the right time in the right place and the most important things, and allow them to act on that. And I think if we search for those problems, there's so much opportunity in the companies that we work with, the teams that we work on, and even in the products and solutions that we build for our clients. If you do work for other people, I think that's what we owe them in terms of innovation and bringing a mindset to them of how can we actually apply these techniques that we hear today in practice in real products. So thank you.